I like to do what we called either crown molding or architectural trim. So one way you can do this is to actually just select through, right? And then maybe let's select these faces. So you could do things like extrusions. For me, I don't mind that method. I usually kind of like it to be more of a floating sort of mesh. So I'll just show you quickly doing it this way. So I'll do an extrusion. So let's go to face and then select around, right? Do an extrusion with a thickness. Right, so if it's a very basic building, this is kind of cool, right? Shows up all the way. If you want some more detail, you can try, let's put another cut in here. So this way is just pure poly editing. If you feel more confident and comfortable with that, that's great. So we'll do another very small extrusion with a thickness. And then let's say you want one part of this to be sort of rounded. So maybe I'll again go to multi-cut, hold control. Middle mouse click, control middle mouse click will divide this through the middle. And we'll do another kind of little extrusion here. Maybe we'll do another thickness. But let's say I want this thing to be rounded. Well, what you can do is, again, we can go in and take this profile. So I'll grab the edge and, again, select the ring. A ring is parallel, right? Parallel edges. A loop is continuous edges. And if I go to multi-cut, right, if you go into the settings of multi-cut under edge flow and hold control, so again, I'll probably do this with control middle click, it's going to pop that out. Now, I may also want to just try to scale this out, right, so it's going to come out a little bit more, yeah, let's scale it a little bit more on the Z as well. So it's going to be sort of sticking out in this fairly like sharp or jagged fashion. Well, if you keep that edge mode, edge flow, edge flow option on, and you control click and drag again, control middle click, it's actually going to make that part look rounded. So control middle click, and you see it rounds that part out. So you can get kind of a nice little architectural flair to the building. Okay. Sometimes I'll also go into mesh display and do a soft and harden edge, so we get some nice kind of rounding on this part. And maybe I'll adjust the setting here. I usually go kind of in like 15 to 30 degree increments. And I'll try 60 degrees, hit apply. Yeah, it's not so bad. Okay, so we get some interesting little element there. Sometimes too, you know, if you want to have cornerstones or other types of architectural features, right? We can use something as simple as a square. And oops, let me just take this thing. I'm going to scale this thing up. Now you can do a whole different set of these. So sometimes some buildings will have what looks like a fairly shallow stone column that kind of goes up the whole height of the building. So you can kind of build one like this and lay it over top, right? You'll see this sort of stuff in the old port in Montreal quite a bit. Or you can have, let's say, just a bunch of cubes. So again, if you're trying to put polycount elsewhere, you can have one cube that sort of sits at the corner, like so. And let's just take this. So you can start with overlapping parts and then merge them or combine them. Sometimes I'll leave them separate and floating, but yeah, let's take this. I'll take all the edges. This is simply just get some roundness to the object or some softness to the edges. So I'll bevel all the corners and just give it a couple of segments here. Now I'm not sure how tall this thing is, but again, there's scaling in here, right? So right now it's uniform, which is okay, but if you want to avoid any UV issues, you might want to go to freeze transforms and just make sure you only freeze the scaling. So that should avoid any weird issues with that. Now if you hit Control D, move it up by hand, and then hit Shift D, you should be able to go up the whole side there, right? Pretty good. Now, with all my copies, I probably should have named the first one. But if I go in, I'm going to see if I can grab all of them. And I'll just deselect the stuff I don't want to select. Go to my little custom Dawson panel and go to rename. Call this corner stone underscore, and then just hit rename and number. So it's going to rename and number those quickly. You can Control D, or if you duplicate special, remember I didn't unwrap this thing. I probably should have done a quick unwrap on one. But for now, I'm just going to skip that and we can focus on this. Right? There you go. So it's pretty amazing how fast you can kind of build up detail, right, in your buildings. I'll come back to this trim work. So there's another really amazing way we can do trim work. Let's say we take this archway or this border. If you take that edge selection, you can go Shift. Where is it? Shift. Sorry, it's not under there. I have to go to Modify, Convert. Let me just break this window off. Convert polygon edges to curve. This is such a crazy tool. I really like this. Convert poly edges, and let me just show you what happens. If I hit Apply, it's going to give you this kind of weird rounded shape, but if I undo and set it to linear, you get an exact, basically this is a NURBS curve. Let me see if I can just select the curve there. Deselect the building. I'm going to go to Modify, go to Center Pivot. So now I've got a curve, right? So what's great about that? Well, I'll show you guys with a little bit of experimentation. I'll just do something that's maybe more on the Gothic side of things, even though it doesn't quite make sense for this building, but we just scale this thing up and then Control D duplicate, Control D, maybe duplicate over here. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is just start Boolean this mesh together. So I'll Boolean, delete history. And I'm doing a union on this, Boolean union, and delete history. Now for me, the kind of quick and lazy way to clean this up for something that's going to just be an extrusion is to grab all the side polys. Control Shift I will flip the selection around, and then you can hit delete. And then I'll simply just grab the top face and do a fill hole. That's all I need this to do basically, is to be a nice flat polygon. Looks like the pivot is centered, so what I'm going to do next is go to a top view, and I want to just roughly align that face to one of the corners of this this archway that I made a NURBS curve snapshot of. And I'll slide this thing down roughly to here. Next up, grab the face, shift drag over the curve, shift right click, go to extrude faces, but go into the options. And you want to usually increase your divisions. Usually I like to start with 1, hit apply. So it's sort of telling you there's a starting point over here. So you may want to move that mesh over, but I'm going to just try to increase my divisions. Like 27, 28. It's not bad. So take the mesh. So let me just take the object. I'm going to just slide it over here and see if I can get a better result. So I'm going to go back to face, shift, drag over the arch. So I'm getting kind of a better result. So its starting point might be somewhere down here actually. So go back to object mode. You know, it's not always easy to find that starting point either. So if it's a challenge, you know, you may want to also just, you know, there's a couple ways around this, and I'll show you guys version 2, right? Which is basically like what I did with the archway before. But so shift, click, and drag. Again, I usually like an even number of divisions. So maybe I'll try 28. Now, it's close, it's not perfect, but I'm going to show you how we fix this. I'm going to close this up, hit Alt-Shift-D if you're happy with the result. So again, it's a little lopsided, right? There's some weird warping at the bottom, so we can actually delete this. I'll delete those as well. And then we can just take these edges and shift drag them down. Looks like, yeah, I've actually got a little bit of broken mesh here, so I might actually bridge this stuff together here. Yeah, this will work fine. Try to bridge these polys. Bridge, there we go. And then you can just take your open edges and shift drag them down. By the way, if you notice an edge that creeps up like this, chances are there's some sort of weird problem in the mesh. So you might want to be careful about that. I'm just double checking to make sure. Well, it should be okay actually, oddly enough. Okay, so got our bottom edges, and then you can just either pull them down, or I usually like to extrude them down. It's pretty nice, right? So if you go to mesh, I might just do again another soften harden, so I get a fake sort of roundness across those tube parts, and then a nice crisp edge in between. So you can do this in all sorts of ways, right? If you want to keep a section of this as a template for something else, you can go to Shift, right click, duplicate faces as a separate object. So this can become part of your own sort of architectural kit bash, right? So I'm building up little assets essentially. Modify, center pivot, there we go. So I can sort of tuck this back and in. You see how perfectly it fits that framing. Right, so this is a way you can get this stuff to be, you know, one small change on top of another starts to multiply and give you so much complexity in such a short period of time. And if you want this sort of thing, let's say, to be square framing for your windows, well, now you can play with things like the mirror tool. So I'm going to go to mirror. I'm going to use the objects pivot. And by the way, you can turn on the mirror plane axes, so you can go in. Sometimes there's hidden settings inside of things like bevel, extrude, and in this case we're doing the mirror tool. So I'm going to turn on pretty much all the rotation options. And let's say I rotate this, yeah, I think my axis is a little bit screwed up, so let me just, before I do any mirroring, I'm going to escape from that and just go to modify and freeze, because I want to reset any rotation as well. Rotate, translate, freeze, and bake. Okay, now I should be able to cleanly go back and do this mirror tool. There we go. Sorry, mesh mirror. Oops. Getting some weird options there. Mesh mirror. Okay, go to object. So now I can actually pull this thing out. If I rotate, right, I want to rotate this cleanly 45 degrees. Woo, what is going on there? That is really bizarre. It's so strange. I have not seen that happen before. Yeah, I may want to be careful. Looks like I'm getting some weird results from this shape. So minus 50. Okay, this looks a bit cleaner. Sometimes too, your merge threshold could be a little bit high or a little bit low. So I'm going to increase that amount a little bit. Yeah, normally you should be able to kind of slide through, and then we get a decent option for this. It should work at 45 degrees. There we go. So I usually delete history after something like this. And then if you need to adjust your, let's say your edges, you want them to be longer or shorter, you can just pull them, right, to get the length and size that you're after. Yeah, clearly I've got some weird mesh hiding out. So even if you think you're doing okay, you might have some weird goofy stuff kicking around. So again, I might take the pivot tool and just sort of roughly center it more to what I think would be the center of this actual mesh. And again, I'll go back to mirror. If we rotate this the other way, let's say about 180 degrees this way, or 90 degrees. Yeah, that might work. All right, so you can start to expand this and go to mesh, mesh mirror again, and then I'll set this to positive. Sometimes it's a matter of finding the right direction. There we go. So then I'll delete my history on that. So now you've got a framing that you can, like I said, basically use in your model. Now, if these polys were to lay flat on the, you know, on inside a window frame, let's say. So let's say I take this. I'll do this from a front view. It's always good to kind of get into a clean view with your mesh. I guess this will be a back view. So I'll kind of roughly place this just visually. You know, whatever my offset would be, I would probably try to delete or clean up that mesh. And let's turn this on. So you can also go by selecting verts. So yeah, for this, you know, you might want to put some of your stuff on separate layers and freeze them. So I can make a create layer from selected, and I'll put this into reference mode. There we go. So I'll select this, grab these polys, drop them down. So I want a nice enough kind of overlap where I think this will be framed okay. Okay. There we go. All right, and then it just pushes back in space. So I'm going to sort of take a look and see how it's positioned. You know, maybe I'll keep that outer edge. So again, if I'm going to have a lot of copies of this, I would actually delete sort of the stuff that at a certain point just wouldn't be visible. Because again, it's just a lot of wasted mesh, right? So I'll sort of check, try to see what I can get away with hiding or deleting. So I'll just sort of pick, I think, a poly right there should be okay. There, so I can delete that. If I isolate the object through Control 1, then I should actually have now two separate sort of chunks. So I can delete that backside, unisolate it. I could do a quick, probably automatic unwrap, or even just maybe go to Create Planar. Let's just turn this off for a sec. If you get real lazy, you can always go to Create Camera Base. So it's going to roughly look at the object from your sort of point of view of the camera, and then we can just kind of split the corners. That's often the sort of quickest, easiest way to unwrap something like this. Take this, so grab each corner, and then we can just sort of flatten it out after I cut it. So go to Cut, grab all the shells, unfold, and we can try to just lay this out quick. It's going to take a second, I guess, to calculate. What's great about this, right? We can Control deduplicate. And we can Shift drag, then do maybe Shift. Oops. Yeah, let me just go back here. So I'll do Control D, slide this thing over, and then duplicate that. And then Control D and maybe just drag this over here, right? You can go in and refine the positioning of all this stuff, but let me just quickly combine this stuff. Combine. I believe, we'll see if this updates here. Combine. Yeah, it can break your instancing, so don't be worried about that. But if you want to keep the instancing for now, you can also go into Edits, Duplicate Special, right, and duplicate this up, because it'll actually duplicate the same height, because your building height hasn't changed, right? So we start to kind of build up our scene this way, right? So it's pretty amazing, you know, how fast you can go. So that same trick of grabbing an edge, if I need to trim around the building, for example, oops, I guess I'm in reference there on the base. So if I grab that base, I can do the same thing with that top edge. I can always say, oh, you know what, I'm going to take the top edge of this floor and go to, let's go to modeling only. I can go to modify, convert polygons to curve. So you can do a trace around the whole building and do another piece of trim that way instead of extruding and poly editing, right? So it's a really, really interesting way you can build up your scene. And let's say for the top floor, you might want to, usually there's a bit of extra height on the top floor. These can probably come down to the bottom floor. So I build, you know, pretty quick, pretty modularly. Yeah, so let's say we're adjusting this, and if I want to raise this up, well, you can see it's affecting all the instances, right? So I do have to go to Modify, Convert, Instance to Object. Go to Face Mode again. Oh, come on, Face Mode. There we go. shift click along this. If you go to shift period or shift greater than, it's going to expand the selection. So I want to just get to the bottom part of that trim without touching the building right there. So undo one step, raise this up a little bit. Then if we take our border edge, top open edge, Control E to extrude, give it a thickness. Instead of actually a thickness, let me try Z translate. No, that's not great. Maybe I'll just do an offset. Offset, I guess, makes a little more sense in this case. Then hit Control E again to give this a thickness. So now I've got a little interior part. I'm going to deselect my edges at either end that are simpler to deselect. So there's, I think, what, 4 loops there. And then what I'll do is I'll go to Bridge and simply match the number of divisions like that. So I can get a nice clean closure for the roof. And of course we can target weld. Let me just go to vertex. Maybe this might be a little bit easier. Sometimes target welding makes more sense with vertices versus edges, but so this will create a nice kind of clean closed top for the roof. Now, sometimes what I do as well, like there's a lot of extra mesh up top, so if you want to simplify your mesh, you can go through and take certain edge loops and collapse them. So maybe I'll switch my, under the modeling toolkit, I can turn on symmetry maybe to Z. There we go. So I'm going across this way. One tool I wish they would add actually in the symmetry tool is to actually have more than 2 axes or more than 1 axis. So they go to collapse edge. You don't want to collapse the center because it'll literally collapse to the center. Just go to merge collapse edge. And then what we can do, so I'll do this with the symmetry across the other way. So grab this edge, shift double click. Right, so we can go through and basically grab edges this way and go to collapse edge. So we can do the same thing. Let's go to here, and maybe to here, collapse edge. So you can simplify your mesh up top. Okay, so one other thing you can do if you wanted to add any roof elements, you could put a little box, skew the box, and do some more detailing. So just to show you as a basic idea, we could, looks like my poly modeling toolbar just like disappeared, but that's all right. Go to cube. Maybe put something like this up here. Take an edge, lift it, and push it in the back corner. If you're building something in New York City, you might have a water tower. A lot of buildings have water towers for water pressure purposes, and I can of course go into more detail with pipes and things like that, but it's all really the same set of techniques.